Hello and welcome to Polotiki, brought to you by News 24. My name is Mahlatse Mahlase, the politics editor for News 24. For our big interview this week, we've got a special guest. We are joined here on Polotiki by the former DA parliamentary leader, Lindiwe Mazibuko. You had Twitter buzz last week when you appeared at an ANC event addressed by the President Cyril Ramaphosa, and of course the guessing game started. Just confirmation, you're not joining the ANC.
I'm not joining the ANC.
But of course, politics is still very much a part of you.
Yeah.
We understand that you're starting an academy. Just tell us about that.
Apolitical Academy, it's called. It's a non-profit, independent, non-partisan program that will do leadership development, public purpose, ethics, values, and interactions between young people and their elders in politics. It's a program designed for people, young people and women in particular, who've always wanted to run for office, always wanted to serve in government, but haven't figured out how to make those entry points. And so we're going to run a year-long program every year with 25 fellows.
Wow.
Designed to enable people who wouldn't ordinarily have these opportunities to transition from one sector outside politics into the political system.
I'm wondering what inspired it. I mean, one of my colleagues was joking to say that you were personally burned by politics. You know, what inspired this academy?
I mean, to the extent that politics was burning or that it was sizzling, I mean, that was a part of the inspiration. But the real inspiration came from when I spent a semester at the Institute of Politics at Harvard University. I did it after I graduated from the Kennedy School. And my role was to be a political practitioner in residence. It was me and 5 other fellows. And our job was to teach a seminar on our area of expertise, to mentor students, to be available for office hours, and to basically inspire young people to careers in public service. And one of the things that happened is I taught this class called How to Build a Democracy, Lessons from Southern Africa, and was able to invite the most extraordinary guest speakers, the former governor of the Reserve Bank, Tito Mboweni, former president of Malawi, Joyce Banda, the former finance minister from Zimbabwe, Tendai Biti. They all came through along with a couple of other speakers. Wilmot James, my former colleague in the DA, came through all the way from Zimbabwe, from Malawi, from Johannesburg, to come and teach a class. And the students found it incredibly inspiring, and what we found is it attracted a lot of African students, diaspora students, who had been thinking about running for office, who'd been thinking about getting involved in politics, but didn't know where to begin. And that's where the seed of the idea was born. It gave me the sense of how deep the sort of lack of interaction between young aspirant politicians and their older generation, like former leaders who built our democracies, how little interaction there is, but also how much of a thirst there is amongst young people who want to be political activists, who want to serve in government, who want to share their skills,
some would say,
but don't have a chance to do so.
I mean, you look at organizations like the ANC, which is the oldest, you know, you start off within the Youth League and you move your way up.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we've got new entrants where the DA particularly had a specific program of recruiting people like you within the DA. How different would this academy be, and how would it feed into the existing political parties?
So I mean, those are essential programs. I was part of the team that ran the Young Leaders program. We used to travel the country interviewing 100 candidates at a time, just to boil it down to a class of 20, after we had received thousands of applicants. So I have a lot of experience in this area. And of course, there's a place for everything. I mean, it's not an either or. You know, some people are not comfortable or not ready to declare their political allegiance outright. Maybe they come from the private sector. Maybe they work in a very sensitive field. Or maybe they just haven't decided. Maybe they know what their value sets are, but they don't know where they fit in.
Why would anybody want to join the political landscape of South Africa? It's so messy and...
It's messy because the wrong people are doing it. When the right people do it, it will not be messy.
Who would be right? I mean, what kind of
people who care about the people they serve. I mean, one of the problems we have in this country is that we have rolling service delivery protests constantly. But the things that make headlines in the news are like political intrigues between individual politicians. There's this big disconnect between the people who are in elected office and the people they're supposed to. The people who are supposed to be served are ignored. And the news and the sort of narrative focuses on the so-called personalities. In politics, we need people who are ready to work, who are ready to serve, who understand who the electorate is, and who who are there to do the work, not just to attain prestige and fame. And so, we're looking for ethical leaders, people who have this burning desire inside them to serve, but haven't figured out where to
I'm
begin.
just looking at voting patterns currently. I mean, every time there's an election, there's a massive outreach program to young people to urge them to actually participate in the electoral process, and they just don't.
Why should they vote if nobody that they recognize is representing them? I mean, the EFF is a great example. The EFF had this really catalytic effect on people's sort of attention towards Parliament. The attention may have been more spectacle than substance, but it was a salient example of how when people see themselves reflected in a system, they kind of sit up and listen and are eager to get involved. I mean, the EFF was singly responsible for bringing in the biggest cohort of young MPs into Parliament in one go. Imagine if we could have that effect across political parties. Imagine how Parliament would shift in its work, in its spirit, in its, and to have people from the generation that is supposed to be served. The average South African is 24. To have women in senior leadership positions, not just filling quota positions,
and I was going to say,
make politics better, make it more attractive.
Independent candidates have not succeeded in South African politics. You have to have the vehicle of a party, and then you look at a party like the ANC, for example. If you don't have the struggle credentials or didn't start off from the COSA's base in high school and proceeded with SASCO, then Youth League, it is very difficult to break the barrier. I mean, I'm looking at Gauteng currently. There's a tussle within the ANC around the youth and the older generation because there is just no space for the young people there.
So one of the things I know for a fact, and maybe political parties don't announce this as much as they should, is that there's not a single political party that has enough of the right candidates. They will all say, without question, we need more, better, younger, more representative, more diverse candidates. Some of them are closer to attaining that goal than others. Some are more specific about what they need. They need people with skills. They need people from the private sector. But there's no political party that has the candidacy options covered. There's no shortage. So the question is, in addition to what political parties are doing, what else can we do? And also, how can we start a conversation about the next generation of public leaders that isn't just about which political party they support, what colors they wear, but is about whether they're ethical, whether they're there to serve, whether they believe in transparency, whether they believe in representation, in women having leadership positions, in young people entering the fray. A lot of our political elders are passing on. Like we're losing not only the foundations of our democracy in terms of people who helped build our democracy, but we're also losing opportunities to interface these elders with the next generation.
Yeah.
And again, if it only happens inside the political party, that means I only have access to the political elders of this organization and not political elders who actually formed our democracy. And they come from a variety of parties. People like Terry Lekota, who's now in COPE, people who were at the signing of the Constitution. Patricia de Lille was part of the constitutional development process. She's sitting mayoring in Cape Town. What opportunities are we giving to young people to interact with these leaders before we lose them so that they can capture that spirit and carry on the work that was begun?
I see you about, talking about how to get this generation to get into politics to replace the current ones. But you look at the South African political landscape right now, and a very confused voter is out there, or even an aspiring politician, in terms of infighting is what dominates all of these parties. And I'm wondering, especially as somebody who was a key figure at a very young age of a party like the Democratic Alliance, when you see the implosion that is happening within, does it surprise you and does it inspire you?
So when I think about some of the people who have access to power who shouldn't, it doesn't surprise me. When I think about the infighting as one of the things that makes politics unpalatable to quality candidates, I get upset. I feel sad. And I think about the ways in which we can work to replace the bad actors, the state capturers, the kleptocrats and the power hungry, with people who are ethical, transparent, engaged, and people focused. And I know it's not going to be easy. It's always going to be an uphill battle. But I also know that in every political organization in this country, in this region, there are good people, just as there are also not so good people. And if we can connect our leaders with the good people, we can we can create a snowball effect where excellence is the thing that's replicated. One of the things that happens in the midst of all this infighting is the good stories don't get told. The stories of leaders who are doing incredible work get lost in all the scandal. So part of our work is not only to highlight that to voters, but it's also to highlight it to potential candidates, to say, yes, we see that there's a lot of complexity and personality fighting happening in this party, but do you also know that there's such and such a person and such a department, such and such a province and such a city, where if you really care about serving, you can go and participate.
I'm wondering if we could also use this opportunity to just reflect. I mean, we are obviously going towards what we're expecting to be quite a hectic and quite intense electoral process in the next coming months. And I'm wondering, from where you're sitting, who is likely to grab the youth vote?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, traditionally what's happened all over Africa, and remember, this is a regional program, we're not just running it in South Africa. Our two anchor countries will be South Africa and Zimbabwe, two very exciting countries. We're very interested in Angolan candidates as well, because there's been a transition there, and what we're trying to capitalize on is this sort of Tumamina moment where people feel like, okay, politics is not that much of a sizzle. So perhaps this is the time for me to answer that call. And so this is definitely a regional program, but the two anchor countries will be South Africa and Zimbabwe. Sorry, I totally forgot your question.
No, I was just saying, I mean, looking at the current status of political parties, which ones would likely
Who's going to capture the youth vote? Yes. So, I mean, I don't know. I think that so traditionally in Africa, it's the newer political parties that are able to capture young voters. Your liberation movement parties kind of often struggle. But I know from the friends, the contacts, the networks I have in Zimbabwe, for example, that there is a kind of a new revival going on inside ZANU-PF. Right? The president of Zimbabwe is I mean, it's a very low base that Robert Mugabe set, but there's an optimism about what's happening in that party, so there's no reason to suspect that the ruling party there can't suddenly attract new voters. The same is true here. It's been an internal transition inside the ANC, but it's been quite a big internal transition, and the culture is already shifting. So there's no reason to believe that traditionally where opposition parties have been able to capture the youth vote, that ruling parties can't do the same. But if you ask me to put my money on it, a 200 Rand note, I would say that probably the majority of young voters will still gravitate towards newer, more modern political parties, which have more representatives who look like them, speak to the issues that they care about. And that's why it's important for all political parties to think about how they can attract this new generation of political leaders.
And then the implosion in the DA, what have you made of it? Especially around the race debate that has been going on, where we saw quite a strong attack against Mmusi Maimane on, when he started addressing white privilege. Yeah,
one of the exciting things about Mmusi is he's kind of been very clear about the fact that he wants to bring in more political leaders from a variety of backgrounds. And some people who benefit from the status quo are obviously going to kick back against it. I've experienced it. Anybody who's tried to institute change in an organization will experience that. I think implosion is a big word. I mean, as somebody who still supports the D, I'm not a member anymore, but I still vote for them. I hope it's not imploding. But I think that this is part of the resistance that comes from an old guard that refuses to let go of power. And sometimes we think that the transition of power from one generation to the next is like a passing of a baton. Sometimes it's like actually friction. It's like going into battle. And I think that's probably what Mmusi and the group of people who surround him and are hoping to advance this kind of new direction are experiencing. I wish them all the best of luck. I agree that the party has to diversify. It's something I've always been very clear about during my own leadership term. And it's not just diversifying the people who are representing the party, but also what the party stands for. You can say what you stand for something, but if the people who represent you don't live out those values, the two things don't come together.
Don't come together. I mean, at the end, you decided to leave because of this contestation around, trying to probably infuse a new direction for the party. How does he navigate it?
So I left for a number of reasons. There were push factors and there were pull factors. There were more pull factors than there were push factors. And in fact, the things that were difficult about politics, I knew are always going to be difficult about politics, whether I'm inside or outside. So, I left for a lot of personal reasons, for personal development, and to go out and live in the world. So, I mean, what advice do I have for him? He's living this thing, right? you know, and, you know, I can't tell you about advice, I can tell you what I hope will happen. And the same is true in the ANC. You've got President Ramaphosa trying to turn around a system that is geared towards corruption. And that's going to encounter resistance as well. But what you hope is that the good people who are ethical and who believe in good governance will triumph. The people who believe in representation and diversity will triumph. So I wish both of them strength to their arm, but I don't believe it'll be smooth sailing. Of course, whenever there's entrenched interests, in the DA it's an old guard who want to hang on to positions. In the ANC it's a state capture crowd who want to hang on to patronage. They're always going to resist. They're going to fight back. They're going to kick. They're going to do whatever they can. And I suppose, you know, surrounding yourself with the right people and staying the course is the most important thing to do.
And towards this election, race is likely to be a very dominating topic. And I'm wondering if your academy will be tackling that, and how do you approach it, given that it's such a sensitive issue for South Africans, and you see how it tears apart organizations. You've just had the EFF accused of being a racist party, the
shocking
way they treated the DDG of Treasury.
So it's very important to note that we are not teaching ideology at all. We're not engaging in the pedagogy with ideology. What we want is to build a cohort of fellows who represent a diversity of ideological backgrounds, such that they can interact with each other in a way that means they challenge each other. So this is one of the advantages of a non-partisan program. If you do a program like the Dear Young Leaders program that I was a part of for many, many years, it's very ideologically focused. You're looking for people who represent your party's values. And so in a sense, it becomes a small echo chamber. So that has its place. But a program like this means that somebody who has, you know, who's a social democrat can come up against somebody who's a conservative, and they can learn how to disagree, how to climb down, how to let go of something that isn't worth hanging on to, and how to change their mind in public and be like, you know what, you've convinced me. I think that, without feeling like they're losing face, without feeling like they've got to cling to this position, otherwise people will think that they're not real true blue liberals, or not real true blue comrades, or real true blue revolutionaries, right? So it gives you the space to be able to engage in a way that you don't have the pressure of but not, what that means is, it doesn't mean you'll go out into the world and that's how the world will be. But the truth about politics is, if you're a member of parliament, for example, you spend more time in committee with other political parties than you do with your own caucus. If you're Solim Simanga, the mayor of Tshwane, you are running a government whose job is to, balance political, priorities between political parties. As politicians, you spend a lot of time interacting with other parties. But programs that don't expose you to that early on may put you at a disadvantage when you have to now negotiate, when you have to decide what to let go of, what your bottom lines are, what you're willing to die in a ditch for, and what you're willing to kind of negotiate. So what's exciting about this program is that we will be able to create that environment. But from a program perspective, we're going to focus on three things. We're going to focus on personal leadership. Why do you want to serve? Who are you? Who's your constituency? Is anyone interested in what you have to say, or interested in the program that you're offering to them, or the solutions to the challenges that you're offering to them? And why are you the right person? Who are you? What is your dark side? What are your bright sides? What risks are there for you in going into public life? That's the first. The second part is kind of the skills involved, fundraising, media, writing speeches, giving speeches, the complexities of being involved in campaigns. And then the third part is ethics, transparency, accountability, honesty, and the difference between something being unlawful and being unethical, and the constitutional arrangements that dictate these kinds of things. And all of that will be underpinned by a program where we do a combination of case studies, where we look at people and countries and organizations that have seen these challenges, and then we invite the very people who've had those experiences into the room to interact with the fellows, so that we keep that connection between the two generations in a way that's non-partisan, that enables me, if I'm an EFF supporter, to engage with somebody from the ANC, or me, if I'm a DA supporter, to engage with someone from a political party in Zimbabwe about what it's like to start a party from scratch. So these are the ways that the exposure can be enriched by being non-partisan. But as for teaching ideology, we're not doing anything like that.
And if somebody is interested, what do they need to do?
So the nomination period opens tomorrow. There's been an extraordinary amount of interest, and a lot of people said to me, you implied it earlier, who would do this? Who wants to run for office? Actually, there's people who've been thinking about this for a long time, and and had approached me when I was at Harvard, who approached me in the street, in the airport, wherever, and say this to me over and over again. And I'm really excited to see, before we even open the nomination process, how many emails are coming in, how many messages we're receiving from people who are very eager to apply. So the nomination and application process opens tomorrow. We're working with a variety of organizations who deal with leadership and who engage in leadership development to find the right candidates. The period will be 2 months long, and then we're going to spend another month going through the candidates, interviewing them, deciding how to form the cohort. And hopefully the program will begin either at the end of September or the beginning of October.
For the first time, we're finding the Democratic Alliance dominating the news. I mean, I don't think we've seen a stage where it's literally on the front pages of newspapers for internal crises, and quite varied. I mean, the one that stands out for me is how they've handled the Patricia de Lille matter. What have been your impressions around that?
Yeah, I have my own views about that matter. I find it really, it galls me when I hear narratives around black women in leadership being referred to as uppity or power drunk or power hungry. You never hear a man being referred to, and certainly not a white man, being referred to as uppity. It implies a kind of not knowing your place. And as somebody who's experienced that kind of rhetoric, regardless of whatever the merits may or may not be of that case, I'm always going to rail against that kind of thing. That leaves a very unpleasant taste in my mouth. I haven't done a lot of reading about the case, but Patricia de Lille and I go back a long way. I served on the communications committee with her in Parliament. She's an extraordinary legislator, a fearless leader, and an extraordinary woman. And I find it difficult to believe how this has come to such a pass. And I find it hard to believe that part of it isn't about gender and race. Part of it isn't about this notion that women should know their place. And that makes me angry. It makes me sad. It makes me feel great disappointment. So I can't engage you on the merits of the case. I don't know the merits of the case. But it's a very sad past. I was on the campaign trail with her in 2011. I mean, she and I have come a very long way. I consider her a friend.
Who emerges the loser? I mean, at this case, you have the DA that's very clear they don't want her anymore. She's on this legal battle to try and clear her name. But who emerges the winner or loser in this case?
I don't know. I think everybody loses when you have a fallout of this nature. I totally understand Patricia's desire to defend her legacy. This is a woman who's made a huge contribution to South Africa's democratic dispensation. Again, to have a situation where very few people are able to really kind of understand what's going on, and just all we hear is kind of accusations of corruption and uppityness and bad management style or whatever being leveled. It's kind of an ugly situation. So I think everybody's a loser in this, the DA, Patricia is a loser, but also the voters are. I think having an alternative in this country, a political alternative, in this country, in any country, is critical to the maturing process of a democracy. And South Africa, as a political kind of going concern, has been waiting for that moment for an alternative to rise. It would be really unfortunate if something like that were to unravel that momentum. It's a sad thing.
It seems like for me that the DA is also experiencing maybe growing pains. In the sense that, you seem to have a party that is at a crossroad. You have a Mmusi Maimane who's very clear about growing the base within the black community and speaking issues of inequality. But there's the old guard within that is pushing very much against that. And in a way, very much similar to what you also went through in your tenure. How does he navigate that?
Yeah, that's an old battle. The battle between... I think you'll find in liberal political parties, and if you're in a liberal party, you're part of a movement called Liberal International, so you interact with political parties from all over the world. But in liberal political parties around the world, there's a real tension between having mass appeal, like Justin Trudeau does in Canada, and between being a very small but influential part of a coalition government, like the Free Democrats in Germany. And that's what's going on inside the DA. People feel like the bigger they become, the more people they have to serve, and therefore the liberal ideology, which is already a broad church, becomes diluted. I think someone like Justin Trudeau is a classic example of how that's nonsense, that you can have both mass appeal and be a liberal organization. But I think the race thing is a powerful trigger for a lot of people. So people assume Justin Trudeau is a liberal because he's a white man. So he can appoint a 50-50 cabinet, but he's still a white guy. So he must be a. But when the question of a party with mass appeal still having liberal values and being black-led and being majority black on a black continent, like, I think that's where people start to fall back on old stereotypes and tropes, and they forget that, for example, the Liberal Party during the liberation struggle was a majority black organization before it split and became the Progressive Party, who were anti-black votes and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I think it's an old battle. It's some of it is ideological, but I think most of it has to do with vested interests. And you're right, part of it has to do with growing pains. But that's the challenge of growing, right? You know, there's good parts of growing, and then there's difficulties that come with growth.
I mean, I do think that they're battling in the post-Zuma era, where you had a very united voice around condemning the corruption that was attributed to former President Jacob Zuma, and now when they have to speak their own policy and their own ideology, that is where the challenge is.
I mean that would be very sad. I mean, I suspect that the entire opposition as a bloc has that challenge to deal with. I mean, one of the things that I was able to do, and really proud of being able to do during my term in Parliament, was to work with a united opposition in opposition to the sort of the spectre of corruption that was taking place under President Zuma. And it's true, having a common enemy, just like for liberation movements, is a powerful thing that keeps you together. So it's possible, yes, that might be one of the reasons, absolutely.
And what do you make of the EFF style of politics?
I love the EFF style of politics. I love it. I love it. Look, I wish it was more. I wish it had more substance under the hood. It's like a Ferrari with the engine is like a Golf, engine. Ferrari on the outside. But what I love about the EFF is just how they're making education fashionable again. I love how their leadership is young, unapologetically young. I worry about the habits that may have been formed under the ANC that may have carried over into the EFF. And I think what's happened with Floyd Shivambu is a classic example of that, under Zuma's ANC. And but on the whole, I think they're just an incredibly exciting development. And look, the DA wouldn't be in government in around the country were it not for 6% is not a lot nationally, but at a local level it was able to contribute to the formation of a lot of coalition governments. So I think the EFF is an incredibly exciting development for politics. I just look forward to a time when its policies become more fleshed out, its platform becomes more robust, and maybe the addition of some choice new candidates will do that.
Do you think that they struggle now with populism, with very little on how those policies would be implemented?
So my experience of the EFF, and I mean, you have to bear in mind, I'm somebody who's out of the country for 2 weeks of every month, so I experience politics in a very disjointed fashion. So EFF supporters, leaders, forgive me if I'm getting any of this wrong. But my experience of the EFF is very much how they are really great at tackling issues of the black experience, the young black experience in South Africa. So they will tackle issues around how young black people in corporate South Africa feel alienated. Now, that's not necessarily a policy issue, but there's space in politics for speaking to people's unhappiness with the status quo, and how the status quo alienates them, marginalizes them, and makes it difficult. And also there's a relevance for that debate being replicated in politics, when a woman stands up in parliament, and is insulted, as I was, for her appearance, that kind of marginalization is replicated in other sectors. So it's an important debate for a political party to get into. I think that one of the other things that they do is they push the limits of policy in a way that forces other political parties to kind of meet them there, So I think that there's no question that the ANC on the land has definitely been pulled by the activism of the EFF. So There's a role for that. But I think for any political organization, as you say, in South Africa, you can't run as an independent. It's actually the law. You know, every list that has submitted to the IEC has to have double the number of candidates that they expect to win, which means every list has to have at least 2 candidates, which means you cannot run for parliament unless you're in a political party. So under those circumstances, where political parties are the seed from which democracy grows, there's a kind of responsibility to have a fully fleshed out manifesto platform that speaks to all the challenges, all the policy areas. And so while that stuff where you dive into an important debate matters, policy also matters. And you would hope a new organization like the EFF would be able to flesh that out.
And then we've got the ANC that's now preaching a new dawn with a new leader. And earlier on, you were talking about whether this leadership would be able to get rid of the old ANC. And the way you see it, can we still honestly talk about an ANC that is likely to lose to a coalition government?
So, I don't know. I'm not an analyst. I don't analyze for a living. It doesn't interest me. All I can speak to is my experience of politics. And there's 2 things. The ANC, if I'm a leader in the ANC, my role isn't to get rid of anyone. Because the mistake we make when we talk about corruption is we turn it into a goodies and baddies debate. And we act as though becoming corrupt isn't something that anyone can become. And the truth is, you watch what's happening in Steinhoff, you watch what's happening in the ANC, the liberation movement of, the biggest liberation movement on the continent, the oldest, sorry. Anybody can become corrupt. And it starts very, very small. It starts with more people than you expected walking into a meeting, and a meeting about government becoming a meeting about contract, and you not saying no. It's kind of, and that's one of the things we want to teach. We want to demonstrate how this thing is like creep. It happens very slowly. So there's degrees of corruption in terms of the people who are in the ANC. There's people who've been involved in unethical behavior and people who've been involved in unlawful behavior. Obviously, unlawful behavior must be punished. Unethical behavior must be rooted out. A culture shift needs to take place. But that culture shift can happen in people as well. So it's not about getting rid of people. It's about changing the organization so that everybody who's in it, including those who were part of a previous dispensation, understands that that's not how it is anymore. And that's the real challenge, is changing the culture, the architecture, the thinking, of an organization when it's been so wholly turned towards self-enrichment in such a fundamental way. But as I said, like any other political party, there's just lots of great people in the ANC, lots of great people who can lead this charge, but they need to be given a mandate and they need to be given political power in order to do so. So, I mean, I don't think anything in politics is a question of getting rid of and then empowering or removing and then whatever. Elections are about removing and replacing, but you can't run a whole organization based on like a constant changing of the guard. That drives a kind of alienation that you can never come back from. But I mean, I think anything is possible. Is a coalition government going to take over? I haven't looked at the numbers. I mean, I haven't looked at any polls, and I don't know. I think it's always possible. My view was always that it was more likely to happen in 2024, but it was always a possibility, especially after 2011, that it could happen in 2019. I suppose a lot of it hinged on the possibility of Jacob Zuma and Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma winning at Congress, which didn't happen. And so the calculus has probably changed, but I wouldn't rule anything out. Crazy things happen all the time. In France, a political party that was formed a year prior is now governing. Its president is in charge and it has 60% of the House. Something that was unthinkable to the left and the right in the system at the time. So I never rule anything out in politics.
All right. Thank you very much. That was Lindiwe Mazibuko, who's co-founder of a new political academy. In fact, it's called Apolitical Academy. She has been our guest here on Polotiki, brought to you by News 24.